Cyberpunk 2077. It has received a next-gen upgrade as well as a whole bunch of fixes, which begs the question, is Cyberpunk properly playable now? To help me answer that question, I've got Jean-Luc with me, who has been playing the updated version of Cyberpunk for the last day or so. Hi, Jean-Luc.
Hey, yeah, I've been checking out the PS5 version as well as the PC version with the 1.5 patch update, and my initial impression after a day with it is that this is the version of Cyberpunk that should have been released at launch. It feels like it's finally a mostly complete experience from a technical standpoint. I realize that is kind of faint praise. It's a pretty low bar to maybe set, but it's, you know what, that's kind of where we're at with Cyberpunk. But yeah, it feels like it's finally playable.
Yeah, because I played it on PlayStation. I was playing on PS5, but obviously I was playing the PS4 version. I was still, subject to a lot of crashes. I know you said you played the PC version too, but let's hit it off with the PlayStation 5 version, because PlayStation is where a lot of the issues were, obviously leading it to it being taken from the PlayStation Store. And obviously there's a little bit of hubbub that it's not as easy to upgrade the PS4 version to PS5 as it is on Xbox, where Smart Delivery just does it all for you. And also on the PlayStation 5 version, new trophies, because it's not even the same trophy list.
No trophies, which is a real shame because it's a new trophy list. So you don't get that fun satisfaction of watching all the trophies pop in for you when you load in your save. You got to do the usual thing that's just sort of a part of the PlayStation ecosystem at this point, where you have to download a whole new thing. Thankfully, my saves were able to download without any worry, so I could just immediately pop in. And yeah, the PS5 version is pretty great. So it has two modes that it offers: a performance mode, where the game will run at 60 FPS at a dynamic 4K, as well as a ray tracing mode, where it'll run at a 30 FPS with a dynamic 4K. In my experience, the performance mode is fantastic. It is an open world game, so I can't speak to how consistent the dips are throughout the entire game's experience. I'm sure there's going to be spots where it dips, but in my time with it yesterday, it was smooth as butter.
Damn.
And I really do think the performance mode is the way to play, because the ray tracing mode, while it is 30 FPS, I think John Linneman from Digital Foundry on Twitter actually described it really well. It feels very heavy. It's a little sluggish in the way it moves. It doesn't have that like smooth 30 in the way maybe some other games do. And then, to be honest, like the visual enhancements around the ray tracing are a little disappointing. They went with ray trace shadows over reflections or ray trace lighting. Ray trace shadows are probably the least noticeable upgrade. I really doubt most people are going to even tell there's a difference. Sure, if you do side by side, you'll be like, oh yeah, I can see those shadows there. But where like reflections are a little bit more flashy, and personally, ray trace lighting, in my opinion, is probably one of the most impressive things about ray tracing. So I'm kind of bummed that console players don't get a chance to experience that. I almost wish that they had another mode that would actually like just put the game at like 1080p so that you could maybe experience ray tracing. But that's being nitpicky on my part. It still works and runs fine for the most part, but yeah, if you're gonna play it, definitely play it on the performance mode. That 60 FPS, that is where it is at.
I remember one of the big criticisms was that the world didn't necessarily feel as alive as we've come to expect. Have you noticed like more crowd density? Like, what are the roads like driving? Have you noticed any big changes there?
I would say it feels natural and normal. They've added a bunch of improvements, they've said, to AI with like tweaking crowd AI as well as tweaking like combat AI. When you're playing it, you can't immediately tell, oh, how different is this really? It's more that you don't notice it.
Right.
It's not in the way anymore. Like when you played the game originally, it's like, okay, I'm constantly noticing all these issues with the lack of crowd or people popping in. That was just immersion breaking. And that is no longer a thing that I have noticed when I was just playing the PS5 version naturally. I mean, it's still a video game. Like I'm sure there are going to be people who have found ways to like notice weird issues with it. But where before I would just be playing the game and all these things were popping up, just playing it naturally now, I'm not thinking about that stuff anymore, which is really kind of like what you want.
Yeah, exactly. That's super exciting. That's super encouraging, because I remember there were a lot of memes coming out of like people just watching the crowd reactions to if there was a gunfight in the streets. Before we move on to the PC version, what other big takeaways from the PS5 version have you noticed? Like, have they done anything with like DualSense, that kind of thing, to really make it feel like a next-gen version?
Oh yeah, they're taking full advantage of the DualSense, which is kind of neat. So now a lot of your little like tech sound effects actually play out in the DualSense controller, which is neat. So like when you get like a phone call or anything like that, of course you can turn that stuff off. They also have the adaptive triggers, which are fine. To be honest, I actually kind of found them a little annoying, but you can just go ahead and turn them off. But yeah, like they have all that stuff there. They also have activities, which is cool. So, you can use that thing. Yeah, they went full in with adding all of like the next gen features you'd expect with like a proper PS5 version.
So in terms of the PC version, how did that stack up after this update?
Really well for me. I'm running the game on a 2080 Ti, and when I played it back at launch, I could get it to run, but it just was kind of hitching a lot of spots, just felt very poorly optimized. Playing it now felt like a night and day difference in just how smooth it felt. I imagine that's a case of not just this one update, but sort of like a cumulative, all the updates they've been applying over the last year. But at least for me, it felt like it was just way more optimized for my PC. Now, I have heard from other people, I was kind of like looking at the Reddit and seeing if anyone was having issues with it. Apparently there are still some technical issues that people have been having as far as like, the game like not running well on their computer, or feeling like someone was saying they actually thought it was worse optimized. So it's just kind of the nature of PC games is, can't really account for everyone's setup. But it seems like for the most part, that is more the exception than the rule, where it used to be with Cyberpunk. And I would say, in my experience, it feels very, very smooth.
But it's obviously not just like the improvements to how the game runs and how the game looks. They've put in a lot of quality of life changes and improvements in. Even looking at those patch notes was so daunting. I think the big ones that stuck out to me were the fact that V can change appearance, get apartments. What are the big things that leapt out at you when you booted up after about a year away?
So for me, actually, the biggest thing that I noticed up front was the map. Ooh. That was the thing that got me the most excited. If you remember last year, we made a video where we talked about the improvements we wanted to see in the game, and one of them was how that map was just a complete mess of icons.
Yeah.
So they've actually gone ahead and redone a lot of the icons to make them more visually distinct from one another. No longer is buying a car the same icon as a quest, so you're no longer like confused about that. You can also actually go in and customize what you want to be shown, as well as they give you a couple presets for options. So overall, I think that plus a bunch of other tweaks, you can see like how many quests you've done for this particular fixer. Small stuff like that just kind of compounds over, and it has a much more pleasant user experience as you're navigating the menus. They've redone the whole game economy in a lot of ways with the way shops work, as well as clothing will actually have a lot of better stats, and they've reworked like stuff you can sell to Ripper docs. That is a hard thing to gauge how much of an impact that truly has on the game after only one day of playing. You really need to play through the whole game. But just from my initial impressions of it, it is a lot stronger, and I find myself, where in the original game, I didn't even bother with the economy because it felt so unnecessary. It feels like they're really taking steps to improve that, and I'm curious to see how people kind of evaluate it, like as they replay through the game properly, but it feels like they're taking the right steps to address that kind of stuff.
And what about driving?
Oh, I thought driving felt way smoother. I immediately noticed a difference in it. It didn't have like the swimminess to it.
Yeah.
I have heard some people say they actually think it's worse, which I think is just a case of driving in video games is so subjective from person to person. But at least in my experience, I immediately noticed a difference, and I was like, yes, this feels better to me. They've also talked a lot about things like the AI with like combat, and we mentioned like crowd stuff, and kind of what I said before, which is I can't truly tell, like, is this AI better? Hard to say without like really like deep diving and doing like a big comparison. But as I mentioned before, I'm not noticing the AI the way I used to. I'm not being distracted by the AI, which to me, that's the important thing. So maybe it's like a little bit of a placebo effect where like they say it's better and I believe them, but it feels better.
What about bugs? Because obviously, I mean, saw a lot of T-posing in the original release.
Oh my god, yeah.
How's that been?
In my experience playing yesterday on both PC and PS5, I experienced no bugs at all.
That is
the most was I had
wild.
like a small object like pop, like a collision thing, but that's like a normal open world thing that happens in every video game. That's not to say that there aren't still bugs in the game. Our very own Aaron Sampson talked about how he booted the game and immediately had like an invisible wall, and then like some crowds pop in. I've definitely seen threads of people talking about different bugs they've been having, so I'm not going to go ahead and say like, yep, the game is perfect. No video game is perfect, obviously, but based on like what I had before, where I was constantly experiencing hitches, visual bugs within seconds of playing before. The fact that I was able to play a whole day and not have any bugs, to me, is a great sign of where this game is at.
Hell yeah. Any other of the new features we want to talk about?
I messed around, like they let you do things like reset your skill tree, which is super nice. I popped into like my late game save and it was sort of like, I don't know what to really do with this, but I kind of like reset it just so that I could try some of the new skills, like the knife throwing that they added, which is cool. Again, that's the kind of stuff that I won't have the full sense of how it actually changes the game unless I do a proper full playthrough. But just looking at other people's experiences, people seem really happy and excited about some of the changes to that stuff. There's also things like the apartments that they've added, which is great. That stuff is nothing game-changing necessarily. Like, you can buy a cool apartment, you get to walk around in it, you can make some coffee, you can smoke a cigarette, which is fun, play some guitar. Really, it's more of just like kind of like a nice like ambient, like, you know, putting you in the world, and you get like, I guess, like an extra fast travel location with a stash, which is nice. I think for me is going to be interesting to see where they go from here with that, because the game is now in a really good state and it feels like we're finally ready to like move on from this chapter of Cyberpunk's life. I don't think people are going to forget about the state of this game anytime soon.
I think that they have a lot of work to do still to build back that goodwill.
Absolutely. I think this game's buggy like legacy will probably stick with it for all time. But it feels like we are now ready to move past that. And so for me, it's more like, well, where are they going to go next? What's the DLC going to be like? What's the potential expansions that they, talked about? As far as I'm aware, they're still planning on doing that stuff, and maybe now they can finally feel ready to move on for that. And I think this is the perfect opportunity for people who have been waiting to finally go back and check the game. Like on a personal level, I find Cyberpunk to be still a pretty messy experience overall. Just as a game fundamentally, I think it's maybe has a bit of an identity crisis where it's like, does it want to be an RPG? Does it want to be an open world game? I think the story has got some great highs and lows. But the problem is that it was so hard to experience that stuff because there was just that technical barrier.
Yeah.
And I knew a lot of people who got the game at launch or were thinking about getting the game at launch, and then they said, you know what? I'm just not even going to touch this until I know it's in a good state. I'll wait for the next gen update. I don't want to deal with this. And that day is finally here. So it feels like people will actually get to play and judge the game on its own merits, not just its technical merits. So it's exciting. It's exciting that this game is finally in a place where people can do that.
Exactly. And for more on Cyberpunk, we have a whole lot about the game on our channel already, including a bunch of lore videos that Jean-Luc did a couple years ago, but they are still as relevant as ever if this is your first time jumping into Cyberpunk now that it's been updated, or if you've decided to pick it up again because of all the changes and they've got you excited. For more on the game, obviously keep it GameSpot, and we'll see you next time.